The psychodynamic approach. The psychodynamic approach looks at the role of the unconscious, the structure that is the id, ego, and superego, defense mechanisms including regression, denial, displacement, psychosexual stages. It is closely associated with the work of Sigmund Freud. Key terms: the unconscious is a part of the mind that we are unaware of, but continues to direct much of our behaviour. The id is the entirely unconscious. The id is made up of selfish aggressive instincts that demand immediate gratification, and it is formed when we are born. The ego is the reality check that balances conflicting demands of the id and the superego. It uses defense mechanisms to protect itself. The superego is the moralistic part of our personality, which represents the ideal self, how we ought to be. It is our sense of right and wrong, like a conscience, and it is always in conflict with the id. Defense mechanisms are the unconscious strategies that the ego uses to manage the conflicts between the id and the superego. The psychosexual stages are the 5 developmental stages that all children pass through. At each stage is a different conflict, the outcome of which determines future development. Discuss the psychodynamic approach. Refer to at least 2 other approaches in your answer, 16 marks. Freud highlights the role of the unconscious mind, the structure of personality, and the influence that childhood experience has on behaviour and later life. Unconscious processes, the iceberg analogy. Freud proposed that only part of the human mind is where we know and are aware of as the conscious mind. Most of the mind is made up of the unconscious mind. This is the part of the mind that we are unaware of and contains threatening and disturbing events that have been repressed and locked away and can have an influence on our behaviour. The preconscious included thoughts and ideas which can be made aware of during our dreams. When unconscious conflicts between id and the superego cannot be resolved by the ego, they create anxiety. To reduce this anxiety, we use defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies used by the ego to maintain the demands of the id and the superego. Denial. Refusing to acknowledge reality. For example, having lost your job and yet you go to work every day. Regression. Forcing a distressing memory out of the unconscious mind. For example, a child who is abused by their parents later has no recollection of the events but has trouble forming relationships. Displacement is transferring feelings from their true source onto a substitute target. For example, being angry at your father but shouting at your little sister. Psychosexual stages. Focused on importance on early childhood experiences, including the relationship with your parents and how they would affect your behaviour and personality in adulthood. A person passes through 5 stages. Each stage is marked with a different conflict. If the conflict is not resolved properly, it would lead to a fixation affecting adult life. The oral stage is where we have pleasures on the mouth, suckling, thumb or breast. And the fixation outcome, oral fixation, biting nails and smoking. This occurs at 0 to 1 years. The anal psychosexual stage is 1 to 3 years, and this focuses pleasure on the anus, pleasure from holding or expelling feces. If toilet training is too harsh or too lax, there is anal retentive, which is organised and obsessive, or anal expulsive, which is outgoing and messy. The phallic stage is 3 to 4 years, and this focus on pleasures on genitals. The Oedipus complex, a boy who likes mom and hates father, and Electra, the girl who likes father and hates mom complex. The phallic personality, the narcissistic obsessive interest in self, and possibly homosexual. Latency is the sexual drives are repressed, however there is no fixation. Genital, here is the start of puberty, sexual desires become conscious, and fixations and outcomes may be difficulty forming relationships. So, contribution to society. The psychodynamic approach revolutionized therapies for treating mental illness by offering the first talking therapy called psychoanalysis. Free association. A patient's articulation of free associations is encouraged in order to reveal unconscious thoughts and emotions such as traumatic experiences that have been repressed. Dream analysis. Dream interpretation is the process of explaining the meaning of the way that the unconscious thoughts and emotions are processed in the mind during sleep. The Rorschach ink blot test. Subjects' perceptions of ink blots are recorded and then analysed during psychological interpretation. Evaluation. The strengths of this approach is that it is the only approach that considers the role of the unconscious. By considering the role of childhood, it helps to explain adult behaviours. It recognises the complexity of human thought and how these can be interpreted through dream analysis. It offered society a method of social control, which is psychoanalysis, and many therapies have stemmed from this. However, weaknesses, it is not objective as the unconscious is falsifiable. Some say it's too based upon sex. Some say it's too focused upon male gender. It doesn't adequately explain the development of female gender. It cannot be extrapolated because it focuses on the unconscious mental processes not appropriate in animals. Explanatory power. Although Freud's theory is controversial in many ways and occasionally bizarre, it has nevertheless a huge impact on psychology and Western impacts and Western contemporary thoughts. It has been used to explain a wide range of phenomena, including personality development, abnormal behaviour, moral development and gender. It has been significant in drawing attention to the connection between experiences in childhood and the relationship with our parents and later development. This increases the validity and support for the approach as it is a useful approach. The case study method. Freud's theory was based on the intensive study of single individuals who were often in therapy, for example, the case of Little Hans. Although Freud's observations were detailed and carefully recorded, critics have suggested that it is not possible to make such universal claims about individuals who were psychologically abnormal. Furthermore, Freud's interpretations were highly subjective. It is unlikely in the case of Little Hans, for instance, that any other researchers would have drawn the same conclusion. In comparison with other approaches we have come across in this chapter, Freud's methods lack scientific rigor. Another weakness of this approach is that the concepts are untestable. The philosopher of science, Karl Popper, argued that the psychodynamic approach does not meet the scientific criterion of falsification, in the sense that it is not open to empirical testing. and this means the possibility of being disproved. Many of Freud's concepts, such as the id and the Oedipus complex, are said to occur at an unconscious level, making them difficult, if not impossible, to test. According to Popper, this affords psychodynamic theory the status of pseudoscience, which is fake science, rather than real science. Psychic determinism. Freud believed in relation to human behavior that there was no such thing as an accident. Even something as apparently random as a slip of the tongue, such as mistakenly describing your partner's new outfit as fattening rather than flattering, is driven by unconscious forces and has deep symbolic meaning, through the meanings pretty obvious in the case of the fattening example. The psychodynamic approach explains all behavior, even accidents, as determined by unconscious conflicts that are rooted in childhood, such as that any free will we may think is an illusion. Well, damn.